Now I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Zemfira, who is in Tbilisi in Georgia. And she's the first of 5 who are going to give a very brief, quick whistle-stop tour of a few particular regions in the world, just looking at some of the things that are standing out. So over to you, Zemfira.
Thank you, Talia. I'm going to share my screen. So as Talia already mentioned, I'm going to look at a specific region, and it's post-Soviet countries. And to do that, I'm going to go to our tab Rights, and I'm going to choose every right and look at every right, how the countries are performing, which of them are best of their specific right and which of them are worst. So the first one is a right to education. And if you open a right to education, you're going to see the big list of the countries that we have a data for on this right. But I want to narrow down. So to do that, I'm going to go to our filter and to choose a region, Europe and Central Asia. But still, the list is quite big. So I'm going to add one more filter, and I'm going to go by income group and choose low and middle income. The thing is that out of 15 countries that were part of the Soviets, 12 of that countries is in this income group. So it's gonna narrow down our list. So you can see list is much less now. So the first country here on the top is Tajikistan, which is post-Soviet country, and it's doing almost 100% on the right to education, on what is possible on that level of income that it has now. And the worst country out of post-Soviet countries is Moldova. Moldova is not well on the right to education. So the next right is right to food. And here we see different picture. Here, Moldova is actually scoring on the top, and is doing pretty well on the right to food. And the worst out of post-Soviet countries here is doing Azerbaijan, which is visibly worse than other countries, and it has quite a big room for improvement on the right to food. The next right in our set is right to health. On the right to health, Belarus is on the top of the list. This score is not particularly great score, but it's the best that we have among post-Soviet countries. And the worst among this set of countries is Azerbaijan again. So Azerbaijan is doing not well also on the right to health. Then we go to right to housing. Right to housing, if we look at this list, we see that Turkmenistan scoring almost 100% on the right to housing on that level of income that it has now. And the worst is Moldova, and pretty close to it, Russia, with 1% difference. So these two countries are doing not well on the right to housing among post-Soviet countries. And the last that we have in our set of economic social rights is a right to work. And on right to work, many of post-Soviet countries doing quite well. So Tajikistan and Belarus scoring 100% of what is possible on that level of income that they have, and Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russia, also Kyrgyzstan and Moldova scoring almost 100% on the right to work. The worst is Georgia. And as a person who is right at the moment here, I can say that is true. The rate of unemployment is here quite high. And to sum up, I would say that Tajikistan is better than average in the Central Asia, and Azerbaijan is worse than average in Central Asia. Belarus is better than average in Europe, and Moldova is close to average, but it's performing quite bad on a right to education and a right to housing. So that's all with me, and I'm going to pass to my colleague Tauland.
Hi everyone, my name is Tauland Zedile, and today I will be presenting the data that Hermie has on the Americas region. I'm sharing my screen now, and I will continue on to go to the quality of life section and choose the Americas region as the rights that we're going to be interpreting. These rights include the right to education, food, health, housing, and work. Currently, we are viewing these states based on the income adjusted option, which tells us that how good these countries are performing based on their GDP, their capacity to provide to its citizens. As we can see, Chile is performing on top with a 95.3%. Meanwhile, countries like Honduras, Panama, and Guatemala are performing lower on the list with a 77.7, 76.5, and 66.2%. An honorable mention here is the United States, which is only performing at 91.3, because due to its reputation and influence on the international community, it's performing quite low. Our rights tracker enables us to view data also individually based on the region. And today we're going to be looking at the right to health in this region, which is going to show us the list of the countries that we have data on. And on top of the list is Nicaragua with a 96.1%. Meanwhile, on the bottom of the list, we have Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana with a 72.9, 72.2, and 69.3%. While we are currently looking at the income adjusted viewing option, we can also view this data based on how these countries are doing compared to other countries globally instead of their capacity based on GDP, which we're going to change right now. And now we can see that the list has changed a bit. Now Uruguay lies on top of the 92.5%. Meanwhile, Haiti is at the bottom of the list with a 63.9%. We can also see here that the United States is a bit lower with a 82.2%. Now, due to time constraint, I'm only going to be adding that we can also view this data based on what treaty ratifications these states have made, which we currently include the International Convention on Political and Civil Rights, and also the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. I will stop sharing my screen now and pass the stage on to my colleague, Odo. Thank you.
Thank you, Talan, and hello, everyone. I'll be focusing particularly on the Pacific region and what countries within the Pacific region. So if you would kindly follow with me, I'll be going through the observed individual ESR rights, commenting on the scores of certain countries. And so firstly, to do that, we'll head to the Rights tab and click on the first individual ESR right, which is the right to education. As you can see, before Zemfira has demonstrated the first page with 160 countries observed. So we'll be adding a filter, and keeping the Pacific in mind, I will click on the Pacific subregion tag. Now you will see that Nauru has the top score with 96.5%, while the lowest score is held by the Marshall Islands at 65.4%. Though Nauru holds the top spot, we know that the most feasible score is 100%, and currently Nauru is only performing 96.5% of what it's able to accomplish at its income level. Advancing over to the next right, we have the right to food. This shows the scores for 10 countries, with Tonga leading the ladder with 100%, while Papua New Guinea has the lowest score of 38.4%. Samoa, Kiribati, Tuvalu, and Fiji all have their scores within the fairly good range, and though given the indication as such, they're still within the 90th percentile and could do better if they maximize the available resources that they have currently. Moving on, we have the next right, which is the right to health. This shows the scores for 9 countries, with Australia having the top score of 88.3%, while Samoa has the lowest score of 71.6%. You will notice that all scores given here are ranging within the 70th and 80th percentile, and Australia's score is the only one that hinges on the fair range, meaning that all the other scores given by the other countries are within the bad and the very bad range. And as elaborated on by my colleague earlier, Mena, there are different aspects to find out as to which how this sub-rights have contributed to the main right, which is the right to health by navigating to the sidebar on my right, your right. Moving on to the second last ESR, we have the right to housing. Now, this shows the scores for 14 countries, with New Zealand having the highest score of 100%, while Papua New Guinea has the lowest score of 27.3%. Of each individual ESR right category, the right to housing for Papua New Guinea is the lowest score amongst all of them. And being of Papua New Guinean descent, I can say that this score is congruent with the state in which my country is in, and therefore needs to do much more better by expanding on the resources that it readily has right now. And moving on to the last ESR right, we have the right to work. And this shows the scores for 10 countries, with Tuvalu having the highest score of 100%, while Papua New Guinea has the lowest score of 43.6%. Tonga, Australia, and Samoa all that have their scores within the good range, within the 98th percentile, but as we all know, 100% is the most feasible score, and therefore there is still room for more improvement. That concludes my Pacific ESR overview and comparison. I will be handing it over to my next colleague, Amy, who will be going over the East and Southeast Asian region.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Otto. I'm going to share my screen. And to look at East and Southeast Asia, we'll use the view for income adjusted and low to middle income assessment standards, since these are most applicable to the countries that we'll be looking at. So we're going to begin with the right to education. And I've already filtered it for East Asia. And you'll notice that some countries here are marked with an asterisk. This indicates that the country is high income, and since we're only using income adjusted and low to middle income assessment standards, this means every country with a high income should receive very high scores. Yet, we see that on the right to education, Brunei as well as Macau, despite being high income countries, are the worst performers in the region. Now, moving on to the right to food, we can see that most of the countries are performing quite poorly. The worst performers are Laos, Brunei, and Timor-Leste. However, there are a few countries that are performing relatively better than their neighbors. So we can look to China and Mongolia. They stand out as leaders in the region. They are performing among the high-income countries and better than Japan. Next, we have the right to health. So most of the countries in Southeast Asia have largely stagnated in their performance over time. And Mena had mentioned how to find that over time data in the quality of life tab. You just have to go into a specific country. Here we can see that China is at the top of the list, while Japan lags behind most of these countries, and Malaysia and Timor-Leste have the lowest scores. Now we're going to go to the right to housing. And so here we'll see that Thailand and Malaysia are leaders in this region with scores that are comparable to the other high-income countries. And Mongolia stands out as having a very significantly low score of 38% on the right to housing. Last up, we have the right to work. So on the right to work, there is a broader trend in several countries in this region where they've made a lot of improvements over time on the right to work. So the countries that have seen improvements include Indonesia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines, Thailand, Timor-Leste, China, and Vietnam. Here, there are a few low to middle income countries that are performing among the high income ones. So that includes Thailand, Malaysia, and Myanmar. And then there's Laos and Timor-Leste at the bottom, who have received very low scores in comparison to their peers. So that concludes this brief insight into East and Southeast Asia. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague in Paris, Momoko.
So thank you, Amy. I'll now share my screen to present you the economic and social rights in Europe. So hopefully you'll see my screen here. Okay, so we choose the quality of life as my other colleagues have done, where we find the 5 economic and social rights with all the scores for 86 countries. I will be focusing on Europe. So I will add this filter. So Europe filter. You can see that not all the European countries are presented here, as we do not have the full data set for some European countries, but the ones indicated here do. So we see here that Belgium has the best income adjusted score of 96%. And this is to say that Belgium is doing 96% of what it is possible at this country's income level for its performance of economic and social rights. The European country with the lowest score, as you can see, is Moldova, where it is doing 83.3% of what it can achieve at its level of income. Now we can switch the view to the global best measure to see how well European countries are doing compared to the rest of the world, including the wealthiest countries. So we see that the order of the score rankings have not really changed in terms of the highest and lowest performing countries, but the rankings have reversed between Serbia and Montenegro and Georgia and Armenia. So, for example, Serbia has ranked higher in the income adjusted score than Montenegro, but now it's reversed. And this is interesting as we see how these scores could show that there is more place for improvement for all these European countries. Now we can also analyze the performance of each economic or social right by European countries. And for instance, now we will look at the right to education. Here we see that there are more countries from Europe represented, since we have a full set of data for these countries on the right to education. I'll go back to the income adjusted mode. We see that Sweden is doing 97.3% of what it could do considering its country's level of income in terms of its performance in right to education. How has it changed over time? As we can see, Sweden has been the highest performer in terms of the right to education since 2017. It was overtaken the UK since 2017. I will now hand over to my colleague Eduardo, who will interview Susan regarding the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks, Omoko.